The conference room on the 35th floor smelled like old leather, lemon polish, and quiet, ruthless wealth. I sat in an oversized chair that felt entirely too big for me, pulling my faded gray cardigan tighter around my shoulders. The fabric had pilled at the elbows from too many washes, and I was acutely aware of how it contrasted against the parade of designer suits and Italian leather shoes surrounding me. My name is Margot Ashford. I was 38 years old, and I was about to receive the final insult of my life. Across the long mahogany table, my ex-husband Preston Whitmore leaned back in his chair with the casual arrogance of a man who had never known a moment of genuine struggle. His bespoke charcoal suit hugged his shoulders perfectly. A heavy gold Rolex peeked out from beneath his French cuff. He looked exactly like what he was, the heir apparent to a $45 million empire. Clinging to his arm was Brielle, his new wife, 27 years old, former personal assistant, currently wearing a diamond necklace that cost more than my annual salary when I still had a job. She inspected her manicured nails with theatrical boredom, as if the reading of a will was beneath her attention. To Preston's left sat his sisters, Cordelia and Genevieve. They were dressed in matching black Chanel, their faces arranged in expressions of performative grief. Their mother Vivian had been dead for 6 months, but I doubted either of them had shed a genuine tear. They were too busy calculating their inheritance. I had been married to Preston for 13 years. 13 years of building a life together, of raising two sons, of believing that I was part of this family. 2 years ago, he had destroyed all of that. The divorce had been brutal. Preston hired a team of expensive lawyers who buried me in motions and depositions until my savings account hemorrhaged dry. He hid $850,000 in offshore accounts I didn't know existed. He submitted falsified asset reports to the judge. He convinced the court that I was an unfit mother, a gold digger, a woman who had contributed nothing to the marriage. I walked away with nothing but crushing legal debt and primary custody of our two sons, Caleb and Sawyer, 10 years old and 7 years old. The only good things that had come from those 13 years. Preston hadn't paid a single dollar of child support in 2 years, not $1. He had moved on to his new life with Brielle, while I scraped together enough money to keep the heat on in our cramped two-bedroom apartment. And now here I was, summoned to the reading of Vivian Whitmore's last will and testament, my former mother-in-law, a woman who had watched her son destroy me and said nothing. I didn't know why I had been invited. I assumed it was a mistake, some clerical error by the law firm. But the senior attorney, Theodore Ashworth, had called me personally to insist. "It is imperative that you attend, Mrs. Ashford," he had said, his voice a humorless gravel. These were Vivian's explicit instructions. So here I sat, waiting, wondering what fresh humiliation awaited me. Theodore Ashworth stood at the head of the table. He was a tall, remarkably thin man in his late 60s, with silver hair swept back from a face that revealed nothing. He adjusted his half-moon spectacles and cleared his throat. "If we are all present," he began, "I will commence the reading." The distribution of Vivian's known assets went exactly as everyone expected. Cordelia received the penthouse in downtown Portland, valued at $4.2 million, along with a trust fund that would pay her $200,000 annually for the rest of her life. Genevieve received the vacation properties in Aspen and the Hamptons, plus a matching trust fund. Preston received the controlling stake in Whitmore Holdings, the family's commercial real estate empire, a portfolio worth an estimated $45 million. As Theodore read the details aloud, Preston's smile grew wider, his chest puffing out with victorious pride. He had won. He had always won. He would always win. I sat very still, my hands folded in my lap, waiting for the moment when Theodore would dismiss me, waiting to walk out of this room and never see these people again. But Theodore wasn't finished. He paused. He turned a thick parchment page. The room fell completely silent. "To my former daughter-in-law, Margot Ashford." Preston's head snapped toward me. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "In recognition of her 13 years within the Whitmore family," Theodore continued, his voice ringing clearly in the quiet room, "and to ensure that there is no ambiguity regarding my final wishes or any claim of oversight, I hereby bequeath to Margot Ashford the sum of exactly $50. A heavy, suffocating silence dropped over the conference room. $50. The words hung in the air like a slap. Preston's lips twitched. Then he let out a short, barking laugh. Within seconds, Cordelia and Genevieve joined in. Brielle covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders shaking with poorly concealed amusement. They thought it was a joke, a final posthumous insult from the great Vivian Whitmore to the woman who had dared to be part of her family. I felt the sudden burning prickle of tears threatening to spill from my eyes. My throat tightened. My hands trembled in my lap. $50, 13 years, 2 children, countless nights helping Vivian plan charity galas and family events. Years of being the dutiful daughter-in-law, the perfect hostess, the woman who held the family together while Preston chased his ambitions. And in the end, I was worth $50. Theodore reached into his breast pocket and produced a crisp $50 bill. He slid it across the polished mahogany table. It stopped right in front of me. Beneath it, almost hidden, was a small, sealed white envelope. "As per the terms of the estate, Mrs. Ashford," Theodore said, his face a mask of stone, "you must physically accept this inheritance to finalize the execution of the document." I stared at the face of Ulysses S. Grant on that $50 bill. The sheer absurdity of it washed over me like a cold wave. I worked 2 jobs, one at a bakery before dawn, kneading bread dough until my shoulders ached, another doing remote data entry at night, staring at spreadsheets until my eyes blurred. I skipped meals so Caleb and Sawyer could have fresh fruit in their lunches. And here, in a room filled with people inheriting tens of millions, I was being handed a single piece of paper money as a final act of humiliation. The laughter continued around me. Preston wiped a tear of genuine amusement from his eye. Something shifted inside me. The burning in my eyes vanished. The trembling in my hands stopped. A strange calm settled over me, cold and clear as mountain water. I reached out. I pinched the $50 bill between my index finger and thumb. I picked it up. I slid the small white envelope into my worn purse without looking at it. Then I stood up. "Well," I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the snickers like a blade. "Tell Vivian I said thank you. I'll be sure not to spend it all in one place." I didn't look at Preston. I didn't look at any of them. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and walked out into the Portland rain. The next morning, reality was waiting for me with cold indifference. The heating unit in my apartment building had broken again, leaving the air inside my small kitchen feeling like the inside of a refrigerator. It was 6:30 in the morning. Outside, the Oregon sky was a bruising shade of purple-gray, promising yet another day of relentless drizzle. I stood at the counter, wrapping my hands around a chipped ceramic mug filled with cheap, bitter coffee. On the table sat a stack of envelopes marked with angry red, final notice stamps. The electric bill, the water bill, the medical bill from when Sawyer had an ear infection 3 months ago. Beside them, almost mocking me, lay the crisp $50 bill and the small white envelope. I had opened it the night before, expecting nothing. A blank card, perhaps, one final twist of the knife. Instead, I found a single handwritten line in Vivian's sharp, elegant script. "Be ready at 7 a.m., dress warmly. Trust me one last time." I had tossed it aside, convinced it was just another layer of the Whitmore family's twisted psychological games. Preston probably wanted me standing outside so he could drive by and splash a puddle on me. But now at 6:58 in the morning, a heavy knock echoed through the thin wood of my apartment door. I froze. Caleb and Sawyer were still asleep in the other room, curled together in the bed they shared because I couldn't afford a 3-bedroom apartment. I set my mug down. I tightened the belt of my worn fleece robe. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Standing in the damp hallway of my rundown apartment complex was Theodore Ashworth. He was no longer wearing the intimidating 3-piece courtroom suit. Instead, he wore a thick wool trench coat, leather gloves, and a dark scarf. He looked entirely out of place against the peeling yellow wallpaper of my building's hallway. Hesitantly, I unbolted the door and pulled it open a fraction. "Mr. Ashworth, what are you doing here?" "Good morning, Mrs. Ashford," the lawyer said, his tone just as formal as it had been in the boardroom. "I see you received the note. However, you are not dressed warmly." "I'm not going anywhere with you." I gripped the edge of the door. "I took your insulting $50. I played my part in Preston's victory lap. We have no further business. For the first time since I had met him, Theodore Ashworth's stony expression shifted. The faintest hint of a weary, almost sympathetic smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Mrs. Ashford," he said quietly, stepping closer so his voice wouldn't carry down the hall. "The $50 was not an insult. It was a legal necessity." I frowned. "What?" "In the state of Oregon, if a wealthy individual completely omits a family member, or in your case, a heavily involved former family member, from their will, the omitted party can tie the estate up in probate court for years. They can claim they were simply forgotten due to mental decline, dementia, undue influence." I stared at him, not understanding. "So," Theodore continued, his eyes locking onto mine with intense severity, "by leaving you exactly $50, Vivian explicitly acknowledged you. She proved she was of sound mind. She proved she remembered exactly who you were. She proved that the sum was intentional. It makes the will ironclad. It makes the document impossible to contest. Why would Preston contest a will that gave him $45 million? I asked, my patience wearing thin. "Because of the other document," Theodore said smoothly. "The second will, the one the $50 locked into place." My heart stopped. "I have a car waiting downstairs, Mrs. Ashford. We have a considerable drive ahead of us, and Vivian's instructions were very specific about the timeline." I stared at the older man. My mind raced. "I have 2 children asleep in their room," I said, my defensive wall still high. "I can't just leave." "I took the liberty of contacting your neighbor, Mrs. Ingrid Bergman, approximately 10 minutes ago," Theodore replied without missing a beat. "I offered her $500 to sit in your living room and ensure Caleb and Sawyer get to school safely. She should be opening her door right about now." Right on cue, the door across the hall creaked open. Mrs. Ingrid, a sweet but perpetually gossiping elderly woman from Sweden, poked her head out. She was clutching 5 crisp $100 bills as a deposit, her eyes wide with curiosity. I realized I had entirely lost control of the situation. 10 minutes later, dressed in my warmest jeans, a thick sweater, and my faded winter coat, I stepped out of the apartment building into the gray Portland morning. Idling at the curb, taking up 2 parking spaces, was a massive pitch-black Lincoln Navigator with tinted windows. A driver in a dark suit opened the rear door as we approached. I slid into the plush leather seats, the warm air of the SUV a stark contrast to the biting Oregon chill. Theodore climbed in beside me. He tapped the glass partition. The driver instantly pulled away from the curb. "Where are we going?" I asked, watching my grim neighborhood roll past the tinted glass. We weren't heading toward downtown. We were merging onto Interstate 84, heading east, straight toward the towering snow-capped peaks of the Cascade Mountains. "Vivian Whitmore was a complex woman, Mrs. Ashford," Theodore began, staring straight ahead at the road. "She was harsh, she was unforgiving, and she prioritized the appearance of the Whitmore empire above all else." "I notice," I said bitterly. "When Preston began his extramarital activities with his current wife and subsequently orchestrated your financial ruin during the divorce, Vivian did nothing. Publicly." I turned to look at him. "She did nothing publicly," Theodore repeated, emphasizing the word. "But she was not blind. She hired private investigators. She saw exactly what Preston did to you. She saw the falsified asset reports he submitted to the divorce judge. She knew he was hiding money from you and your children." My breath caught in my throat. "If she knew," I whispered, "why didn't she tell the judge? Why didn't she help us?" "Because Vivian played the long game," Theodore said softly. "She knew that if she exposed Preston during the divorce, he would fight her. He would fracture the company. He would drag the family name through public scandal. And he would likely still find a way to hide those offshore accounts while making your life even more miserable in retaliation." I felt sick. Vivian wanted Preston to feel entirely secure, utterly victorious. She gave him the company, the liquid assets, the public crown. She let him believe he had won completely. "And what did she give me?" I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs. Theodore turned his head to look at me directly. His eyes reflected the deep green of the passing pine forests. "Everything else." The SUV began to climb steep, winding mountain roads, leaving the city far behind. Vivian Whitmore spent the last 8 years of her life quietly preparing for this moment, Theodore explained. She liquidated her most private, untraceable personal assets. Gold, rare art, bearer bonds. She purchased property under a dummy corporation that Preston knows absolutely nothing about. She built a fortress in these mountains and filled it with everything she truly valued. 8 years, I interrupted, but I was still married to Preston 8 years ago. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. Theodore's expression softened with something that might have been pity. Vivian knew her son, Mrs. Ashford. She knew what he was capable of. She started preparing the moment she saw the first signs of his true character. She hoped she was wrong. She prayed he would change. But she prepared anyway. The SUV turned off the main highway. Tires crunched onto a private gravel logging road that seemed to disappear into the dense, misty forest. The 45 million Preston inherited yesterday, Theodore continued, is tied up in corporate debt, plummeting commercial real estate values, and public scrutiny. Whitmore Holdings has 3 massive loans coming due in exactly 21 days. Preston doesn't have the liquid cash to cover them. He thinks he can refinance through the family's usual banking partners. Theodore's lips curled into a dangerous smirk. He is going to be very, very wrong about that. The vehicle rounded a sharp bend. The dense trees suddenly parted. I gasped. Rising out of the mountain mist, surrounded by towering Douglas firs and a roaring private waterfall, stood massive wrought iron gates. Beyond them, built into the very face of the cliff, was a sprawling estate of stone and glass, 3 stories tall, floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the forest like mirrors. Heavy timber beams and slate-gray stone anchored into the mountainside, an architectural masterpiece hidden completely from the outside world. "Welcome to your inheritance, Mrs. Ashford," Theodore whispered. "Current estimated value, $18 million. The gate swung open with silent hydraulic smoothness. The Lincoln Navigator crunched onto a pristine driveway, paved with dark, imported riverstone. I pressed my face against the cold glass, my breath fogging the window, as the sheer scale of the estate revealed itself. It was stunning, breathtaking, impossible. The structure looked like a natural extension of the mountain itself. Glass and stone and ancient timber, all woven together by some architect who understood that true luxury wasn't about showing off. It was about belonging to the land. Vivian purchased this property 8 years ago through a blind trust registered in Switzerland, Theodore explained as the vehicle glided to a halt. The architect was sworn to an NDA with penalties so severe they would bankrupt his grandchildren. As far as county records are concerned, this is a restricted wildlife conservation tract owned by an overseas holding company. No one knows it exists. I stepped out into the crisp, pine-scented mountain air. For 2 years, I had lived in a constant state of financial terror. I knew the exact price of a gallon of milk at 3 different grocery stores. I knew which utility bills could be paid a week late without triggering a shutoff notice. I knew the precise moment each month when my bank account would hit zero. Standing before a house that had cost $20 million to build, I felt a wave of profound, disorienting vertigo. This couldn't be real. Theodore led me inside. The interior was breathtakingly silent, insulated from the roar of the waterfall outside. The foyer opened into a sprawling living space with radiant heated Brazilian walnut floors. A massive stone fireplace dominated the far wall, flanked by custom leather furniture and original museum-quality oil paintings. A private management company based out of Geneva maintains the property, Theodore explained. They restock the refrigerators weekly. They clean the interior. They maintain the grounds. They do not know who the owner is, and they never will. He gestured for me to follow him down a long, warmly lit hallway lined with mahogany bookshelves. We reached a set of heavy double doors that opened into a sprawling home office. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat a painting of a stormy ocean, and beneath it, a modern flush-mounted steel safe built directly into the bedrock of the mountain. Theodore approached the safe. He pulled a small encrypted biometric scanner from his briefcase. "Vivian programmed this to accept 2 fingerprints," he said. "Her own and yours." I took a step back. Mine? How? I never gave her my fingerprints. When Sawyer was born 7 years ago, the hospital collected biometric data as part of their standard security protocols. Vivian had connections in the healthcare industry. She acquired what she needed. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Trembling, I stepped forward and pressed my right thumb against the glowing green glass of the scanner. The machine beeped. A mechanical lock disengaged with a heavy thunk. The thick steel door swung outward. Inside there were three items: a thick leather-bound ledger, a custom-made black titanium hard drive, and a heavy cream-colored envelope bearing my name in Vivian's sharp, aggressive handwriting. Theodore carefully removed the items and placed them on the desk. "Open the letter, Mrs. Ashford." My hands were shaking as I broke the wax seal. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind that costs more per sheet than most people spend on a meal. I unfolded it and began to read. "Margot, if you are reading this, you had the spine to accept my final insult in front of my worthless son. I always knew you had grit, even when Preston tried to beat it out of you in divorce court. I owe you an apology. I owe you more than an apology, but words are all I have left to give. I was a coward. I watched my son destroy you, and I said nothing. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment, gathering evidence, preparing a proper response. But the truth is simpler and uglier. I was afraid. Afraid of scandal, afraid of losing control of the company, afraid of what Preston would do if I confronted him publicly. I let you suffer. I let my grandchildren suffer, and I will carry that shame into whatever comes next. But I did not do nothing. For 8 years I have been preparing for this moment. I knew what Preston was. I knew what he would become. I hoped I was wrong. I prayed he would surprise me. He never did. The $45 million Preston thinks he inherited yesterday, it is a sinking ship. Whitmore Holdings is drowning in leveraged debt. 3 major loans totaling $38 million will come due in 21 days. Preston cannot pay them. He has hidden his liquid assets offshore, but not well enough. When those loans default, the company will collapse. But you, Margot, you will be ready. In the leather ledger on this desk, you will find everything you need. $8 million in total liquid assets, $5 million in Swiss accounts under your name, and $3 million in bearer bonds stored in a secure vault in Geneva. You will find the deed to this estate, valued at $18 million. All of it is yours. All of it is untraceable. On the hard drive, you will find 8 years of meticulously gathered evidence. Preston's offshore accounts, the falsified documents he submitted during your divorce, 67 forged invoices that Brielle created to embezzle $1.3 million from Whitmore Holdings, records of my other children using the company's charitable foundation as their personal slush fund. This is not a gift, Margot. This is a weapon, and there is a condition. To access the primary funds, you must execute the strategy outlined in the ledger, a complete hostile takeover of Whitmore Holdings. You will buy the company's debt when it defaults. You will seize control. You will expose Preston. You will remove him from power, and you will place the company in an irrevocable trust for Caleb and Sawyer. If you fail to initiate this within 30 days, or if you refuse, the trust dissolves. The money in this estate will be liquidated and donated anonymously to wildlife conservation. You will be left with the $50 bill in your pocket. I know this is cruel. I know I am asking you to fight a war you never wanted. But I also know something Preston never understood. You are stronger than he is. You always were. Do not disappoint me. With love I should have shown you when I was alive, Vivian. I read the letter twice. Then I read it a third time. My hands had stopped shaking. A cold, hard knot was forming in my chest. She's using me, I whispered. She let Preston destroy me. She let Caleb and Sawyer suffer in that freezing apartment. All so I would be hungry enough, angry enough, desperate enough to do her dirty work when she died. Theodore did not deny it. Vivian was a ruthless pragmatist. She believed comfort bred weakness. She knew that if she gave you money during the divorce, Preston would have tied you up in appellate courts for a decade, draining every penny while his lawyers bled you dry. She wanted you desperate. Desperation breeds focus. I looked at the black hard drive sitting on the desk. 2 years of humiliation. 2 years of Preston's smug face in family court, lying under oath about his assets. 2 years of watching Brielle parade around in designer clothes bought with money that should have paid for my children's futures. 2 years of Caleb asking why Daddy never called. 2 years of Sawyer crying because the other kids made fun of his worn-out shoes. Something crystallized inside me. The fear and exhaustion that had driven me for the past 2 years slowly transformed into something else entirely. Pure, icy resolve. You said there's a strategy in the ledger, I said. My voice had dropped an octave. The tremor was completely gone. Theodore's lips curled into a genuine, terrifying smile. There is, and I have assembled the team Vivian requested to help you execute it. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been pushed to your absolute breaking point? Have you ever had someone use your suffering as part of their plan? Margot is standing at a crossroads that will change everything. What would you do in her position? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Less than an hour later, I sat at the head of a massive conference table in a room adjacent to the library. The space was outfitted with state-of-the-art encrypted servers, multiple monitors, and a secure satellite uplink. It looked less like a home office and more like a military command center. Two people were waiting for me in the room. Margot, allow me to introduce your generals, Theodore said, gesturing to the pair. The first was a man in his late 50s with close-cropped gray hair, deep-set eyes, and the kind of face that had seen too much and forgotten none of it. He wore a rumpled button-down shirt and was typing furiously on a laptop. This is Randall Mercer, former forensic accountant for the IRS. He was quietly let go 8 years ago for being far too aggressive in his audits of certain politically connected individuals. Vivian hired him exclusively. He knows more about Preston's finances than Preston does. Randall didn't look up from his screen. He merely raised a hand in greeting. I'm already tracing the wire transfers Preston made to Brielle's wellness consulting firm in the Cayman Islands, he said, his voice dry as sandpaper. It's pathetic, really. He's sloppy. Arrogant people always are. And this, Theodore continued, turning to a striking woman in her mid-50s with silver hair cut in a sharp bob, is Lorraine Vance. Crisis management, public relations, and what she prefers to call corporate strategic communication. Lorraine wore a tailored crimson blazer and possessed an aura of absolute, terrifying competence. She offered me a sharp, appraising look. I watched footage of your divorce proceedings, Mrs. Ashford, Lorraine said, her voice smooth as polished glass. You played the victim well, too well. That's about to change. I took a deep breath and sat down at the head of the table. The plush leather of the chair felt foreign beneath me, but I forced myself to lean back, mimicking the posture of confidence I had seen Preston use 1,000 times. Vivian's letter mentioned a hostile takeover, I said, looking between them. How is that possible? Preston inherited the controlling stake yesterday. He owns the majority of the company. Ah, but that's the beauty of Vivian's trap, Randall chimed in, finally looking up from his screen. He pressed a button, and a complex financial web projected onto the large monitor on the wall. Lines and arrows connected dozens of entities, holding companies, loan agreements, bank relationships, stock certificates. Preston inherited $45 million in equity, Randall explained, but he also inherited the company's liabilities. Whitmore Holdings is heavily leveraged. They have 3 massive commercial real estate loans coming due in exactly 21 days. Total outstanding, $38 million. Preston doesn't have the liquid cash to cover them, Lorraine added, pacing slowly around the table. His personal wealth is tied up in illiquid assets, and those offshore accounts he thinks nobody knows about. He thinks he can refinance through the family's usual banking partners. He's already scheduled meetings with 4 different institutions for next week. Randall pulled up another screen. A series of phone logs and handwritten notes appeared. This is where it gets beautiful, he said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. 6 months before she died, Vivian made 17 phone calls. 17. One to every major commercial lender in Oregon and Washington. He clicked through the notes. She didn't threaten them. She didn't demand anything. She simply told them stories. Stories about Preston's gambling debts that he'd hidden from the board. Stories about the time he tried to bribe a city inspector. Stories about how he treated his first wife and children. Oh, Lorraine leaned forward. Vivian understood something most people don't. Bankers aren't afraid of bad loans. They're afraid of scandal. They're afraid of being associated with someone who might end up on the evening news. By the time Preston walks into First Pacific Bank next Tuesday, Randall continued, expecting to charm his way into a $38 million refinancing package, the bank president will already have Vivian's voice in his ear. Every bank president will. He turned to look at me directly. Your mother-in-law spent her final months making sure that every door Preston tried to open would be slammed in his face. She was dying of cancer, and she used her last breaths to build walls around him. I felt a chill run down my spine, not from fear, from awe. Vivian Whitmore had been playing chess while the rest of us were playing checkers, and she had been playing it for 8 years. When the loans default, Randall continued, his eyes gleaming with vindictive excitement, the company's stock will plummet. The board of directors will panic. Institutional investors will flee. The debt will be available for purchase at a steep discount. That's when we strike, Lorraine said. You, acting through the blind trust Vivian established, will swoop in and buy that debt for 60 cents on the dollar. Under the terms of the original loan agreements, which Vivian herself drafted 15 years ago, default triggers an automatic conversion clause. Debt becomes equity. Suddenly you don't just own their IOUs, you own their shares. You won't just control the company, Mrs. Ashford, Randall said. You'll own Preston, completely. I stared at the web of numbers on the screen. It was brilliant. It was vicious. It was exactly the kind of thing Vivian Whitmore would have planned. But that's not enough, Lorraine interjected, stopping behind my chair. A financial takeover is just business. It's cold. It's technical. The board might still try to find a way to keep Preston in power. They might argue that he deserves a chance to turn things around. She clicked a button on a remote. A series of documents and photographs populated the screen. Vivian wanted more than a takeover. She wanted ruin, complete and permanent. To ensure the board votes unanimously to remove Preston, we need a moral scandal. We need to shatter his golden boy image in front of everyone who matters. The screen filled with images of invoices, bank statements, email chains. Preston's new wife, Brielle, Lorraine said, a hint of disgust creeping into her professional tone. She isn't just a trophy wife. She's been funneling corporate funds from Whitmore Holdings into her own private accounts using fake vendor invoices for corporate wellness retreats that never happened. 67 invoices over 2 years. Total embezzlement, $1.3 million. I gasped. That's wire fraud. That's a federal crime. Exactly. And Preston signed off on every single invoice. Either he's complicit in the embezzlement, which makes him a criminal, or he's so negligent as CEO that he approved over $1 million in fake expenses without noticing. Either way, the SEC will tear him apart. What about his sisters? I asked, remembering the cruel laughter of Cordelia and Genevieve in the boardroom just 24 hours ago. Randall pulled up a new spreadsheet. Cordelia and Genevieve currently sit on the board of the company's charitable foundation. They've been using the charity as a personal slush fund. Private jet flights to Monaco, luxury vacations to the Maldives, Hermes handbags and Cartier jewelry, all written off as donor networking expenses. He scrolled through page after page of receipts. Total misappropriation from the charitable foundation, $2.1 million. Donors gave money to help cancer patients and homeless veterans. Cordelia and Genevieve spent it on spa treatments and champagne. I felt a dark, satisfying warmth spread through my chest. For years, these people had made me feel small, worthless, crazy. They had convinced the world I was a gold digger, trying to steal their hard-earned wealth. And all along, they were common thieves dressed in designer clothing. So what's our first move? I asked. I was surprised by how calm I sounded. The frightened single mother who had walked into this house was rapidly fading. In her place was someone I barely recognized. Someone who was ready to fight. Lorraine smiled. It was a predatory expression, all teeth and no warmth. In exactly 5 days, Preston is hosting the annual Whitmore Charity Gala at the Benson Hotel in downtown Portland. It's his first public appearance as the new head of the family. The mayor will be there. State senators, major investors, local press, everyone who matters in Oregon society. He expects you to be sitting in your damp apartment, Theodore added, crying over a $50 bill. Instead, Lorraine said, sliding a sleek black leather folder toward me, you are going to walk into that gala looking like you own the world, because in 21 days you will. I opened the folder, Inside was a photograph of an evening gown. Midnight blue Valentino, architectural, stunning. Beneath it was a photograph of a sapphire and diamond necklace. That necklace belonged to Vivian, Theodore said quietly. She wore it on her wedding day, 52 years ago. It's been in a safety deposit box for decades. She wanted you to wear it when you faced Preston. I traced the edge of the photograph with my finger. I thought of Caleb sitting in his classroom right now, wearing shoes that were a size too small because Preston's lawyers had stonewalled every child support motion. I thought of Sawyer, who still cried at night because he missed his daddy and didn't understand why daddy never came to visit. I thought of every tear I had shed in secret, every meal I had skipped, every moment of pure terror when I didn't know how I would feed my children. I looked up at Theodore, Randall, and Lorraine. 5 days, I said. My voice rang with newfound authority. Finalize the financial reports. Prepare the SEC documentation. Get me everything I need. I stood up from the table. I want every camera in Portland focused on Preston Whitmore when I burn his world to the ground. The next 5 days passed in a blur of preparation. I spent hours with Randall, poring over financial documents until the numbers swam before my eyes. I learned the architecture of Preston's fraud, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the paper trail he thought he had hidden. I spent hours with Lorraine, learning how to project power, how to walk into a room and command attention, how to speak with the kind of authority that made people listen. You've spent 2 years making yourself small, Lorraine told me during one of our sessions, hunching your shoulders, speaking softly, apologizing for taking up space. That ends now. Preston doesn't respect weakness. He exploits it. If you want to defeat him, you need to become someone he fears. She taught me how to stand, how to breathe, how to look someone in the eye without flinching. It felt like learning to be a completely different person. It felt like shedding a skin I hadn't realized I was wearing. On the 3rd day, I video called Caleb and Sawyer. They were staying with Mrs. Ingrid, who had been more than happy to extend her babysitting duties in exchange for ongoing compensation. "Mommy!" Sawyer's face filled the screen, his gap-toothed smile making my heart ache. "When are you coming home?" "Soon, baby. Very soon." Caleb appeared behind his brother, more reserved. At 10 years old, he had learned to be cautious with his hope. "Mom, you look different," he said, studying my face through the camera. "Are you okay?" I was sitting in the estate's master bedroom, surrounded by luxury I still couldn't quite believe was real. Through the window behind me, snow-capped mountains stretched toward the horizon. "I'm learning some new things, sweetheart," I said. "I'm learning how to be stronger. For you and Sawyer." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then softly, "Is this about Dad?" My breath caught. "Yes, baby. It's about making sure you and your brother are taken care of, no matter what." Caleb nodded slowly. He was too young to understand the details, but old enough to sense that something important was happening. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, sweetheart. Both of you. More than anything in this world." After I ended the call, I sat in the silence for a long time. I thought about Vivian. I thought about her letter. I thought about the 8 years she had spent preparing for this moment, watching and waiting, gathering evidence while her son destroyed my life. I thought about how easy it would be to take the money and run. 8 million in liquid assets. The estate. I could disappear with my children, start over somewhere far away, never think about Preston Whitmore again. But I would always know he had won. My sons would grow up knowing their father had gotten away with everything. And someday Preston would find another woman to destroy, another family to tear apart. I picked up Vivian's letter and read it one more time. "I know this is cruel. I know I am asking you to fight a war you never wanted. But I also know something Preston never understood. You are stronger than he is." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope. Then I went to try on my dress for the gala. Margot is about to face her ex-husband for the first time since discovering the truth. She's about to step into a room full of people who looked down on her, who believed Preston's lies, who laughed when she received that $50 inheritance. What do you think will happen? Have you ever had to confront someone who wronged you? Tell me your story in the comments. Now let's see what happens next. On the 4th night, I stood in front of a full-length mirror in the estate's master closet. The midnight blue Valentino gown fit like it had been made for me. The sapphire and diamond necklace rested against my collarbone, catching the light with every breath. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. "You're ready," Lorraine said from the doorway. "I don't feel ready. I feel like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not." Lorraine walked over and stood beside me, both of us looking at my reflection. "Everyone pretends, Mrs. Ashford. The question is whether you're pretending to be weak or pretending to be strong. Eventually, if you pretend long enough, it stops being pretense." She adjusted the necklace slightly. Vivian wore this when she walked into her first board meeting at Whitmore Holdings. She was 28 years old. Her husband had just died, and every man in that room thought she would sell the company and disappear. Instead, she fired half of them and tripled the company's value in 5 years. Lorraine met my eyes in the mirror. "She saw herself in you, Margot. That's why she chose you. Not because you were weak, because you were strong enough to survive what Preston did and still be standing." I took a deep breath. What if I fail? What if Preston finds a way to turn this around? Then you'll still have this estate. You'll still have $8 million. You'll still have the truth, even if nobody believes it. Lorraine paused. "But you won't fail. I've seen your eyes when you talk about your children. That's not the look of someone who loses." The night of the gala arrived with the cold clarity of a winter storm. I don't remember much about the drive into Portland. I remember the weight of the sapphire necklace against my chest. I remember the soft leather of the car seat beneath my trembling hands. I remember Theodore's voice, calm and steady, reviewing the plan one final time. The Benson Hotel blazed with golden light as we pulled up to the entrance. Crystal chandeliers were visible through the tall windows. Valets in crisp uniforms scurried between luxury vehicles. The cream of Portland society streamed toward the grand entrance in their evening finery. "There's no going back after this," Theodore said quietly. "Once you walk through those doors, events will be set in motion that cannot be stopped." I looked at him. Good. The grand ballroom of the Benson Hotel was a masterclass in old money opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over 300 of Portland's wealthiest and most influential elite. Waiters in pristine white jackets circulated with silver trays of caviar and champagne. A string quartet played classical arrangements in the corner, their music nearly drowned out by the hum of strategic networking and hollow laughter. At the center of the room, standing beneath a cascading arrangement of white orchids, was Preston Whitmore. He was in his element. Clad in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, Preston held court with a circle of local politicians and business leaders, his teeth flashing in a picture-perfect predatory smile. Tonight was supposed to be his coronation, the first Whitmore charity gala hosted by him as the undisputed patriarch of the family empire. Clinging to his arm was Brielle, resplendent in a backless crimson sequin gown that screamed for attention. Her neck was adorned with the heavy diamond collar that Preston had sworn to a family court judge he absolutely could not afford. Across the room, Cordelia and Genevieve were holding court near the open bar, draped in designer silk, laughing loudly at jokes made by state senators and real estate developers. Outside, the Portland rain pounded the pavement relentlessly. But inside, the Whitmore family was untouchable, until the heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom swung open. I did not sneak in. I did not slip through a side entrance. I walked straight through the main doors, flanked by two private security contractors in dark suits. For a long moment, nobody noticed me. The crowd was too absorbed in their champagne and their gossip. But as I moved deliberately down the grand carpeted stairs toward the main floor, a ripple of hushed whispers began to spread. I was unrecognizable. The exhausted, frightened woman who had worn a faded cardigan to the will reading was gone, buried, dead. In her place walked someone forged in ice and $18 million of untraceable leverage. The midnight blue Valentino gown fit my body with architectural precision. My hair, usually pulled into a hurried ponytail, was styled into sleek, elegant waves. The sapphire and diamond necklace blazed against my collarbone, catching the light with every step. But the true centerpiece of my transformation was not the dress or the jewels. It was my eyes. For 2 years, I had looked at the world with fear, with apology, with the desperate hope that people would be kind. Tonight, I looked at the world with the calm certainty of a woman who knew exactly what she was about to do. Preston was mid-sentence, recounting some fabricated story about his late mother's legacy, when his eyes locked onto the staircase. His jaw went slack. The champagne flute in his hand tilted dangerously, spilling expensive wine onto his polished patent leather shoes. "Preston, honey, what is it?" Brielle asked, her voice a high-pitched whine. She followed his gaze. When she saw me, her manicured hand flew to her mouth. "What is she doing here?" Brielle hissed. "Security. Someone get security." But the security guards lining the room, employed by the hotel rather than Preston, did not move. My name was on the VIP guest list, registered under Aegis Holdings, a platinum-tier corporate donor for the evening. Lorraine had arranged everything. I ignored Preston. I didn't even grant him the satisfaction of eye contact. Instead, my eyes scanned the room until they found my actual targets. Table number 1, right beside the podium. Seated at the prime position were the true powers behind Whitmore Holdings. Harrison Caldwell, the silver-haired, ruthlessly pragmatic chairman of the board of directors. 71 years old, a man who had built 3 fortunes and lost 2. A man who cared about exactly one thing, the bottom line. Beside him sat Richard Pemberton, the company's chief financial officer. 55 years old, nervous, sweating. He had clearly heard the rumors about the upcoming loan defaults. These were the men who could remove Preston from power. These were the men I needed to convince. I walked toward them with a slow, measured cadence. The string quartet seemed to fade into the background. Conversations died mid-sentence as I passed. The crowd parted before me like water around a stone. I reached table number 1 just as Preston, finally shaking off his shock, began marching across the ballroom floor. His face was flushed with furious crimson. "Margot!" He grabbed my elbow roughly, keeping his voice low to avoid a scene. "What the hell do you think you're doing? How did you get in here? You're trespassing." I looked at his hand on my arm. Then I looked at his face. 2 years of fear vanished in that moment. "Remove your hand, Preston," I said. My voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried an authority that made him recoil instinctively. Harrison Caldwell frowned, setting his cloth napkin on the table. "Preston, is there a problem here? Who is this woman?" "She's nobody, Harrison," Preston stammered, frantically waving for the hotel manager. "Just a disgruntled ex-wife. She's leaving." "My name is Margot Ashford," I said smoothly, turning my attention to the chairman and extending a confident hand. "I represent Aegis Holdings, and I believe we have urgent business to discuss regarding the fiscal solvency of Whitmore Holdings." Harrison's eyebrows shot up. "Aegis Holdings? The blind trust that purchased the defaulted mezzanine debt on the downtown waterfront project this morning?" Preston's expression collapsed. Whatever color remained in his cheeks vanished completely. "What? Defaulted debt? Harrison, what is she talking about? Those loans aren't due until next week. We're refinancing them." "Not anymore. You're not," I said, my voice ringing out clearly in the sudden, suffocating silence. I gestured to one of my security contractors, who handed me a thick black leather portfolio. I dropped it onto the center of table number 1. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud, rattling the crystal water glasses. "Inside this folder, Mr. Caldwell, Mr. Pemberton, you will find certified documents proving that 3 major commercial loans held by Whitmore Holdings went into default at 5 o'clock this afternoon. The banks have declined to extend or refinance. Aegis Holdings purchased that debt 90 minutes ago." I let that sink in. "Furthermore, you will find bank statements proving that your chief executive officer has been systematically hiding over $850,000 in offshore accounts. Accounts he concealed from divorce proceedings 2 years ago. Accounts that represent fraud upon the court." The ballroom erupted into a cacophony of gasps and frantic whispers. Camera flashes began to explode from the press section near the back. "And finally," I continued, reaching into the portfolio and pulling out a secondary red folder, "you will find 67 invoices authorizing the wire transfer of $1.3 million from Whitmore Holdings' corporate treasury directly into a Cayman Islands bank account controlled by Brielle Whitmore." I turned and locked eyes with Brielle, who was standing frozen a few feet away, her face pale beneath her heavy makeup. "Wire fraud is a federal offense, Brielle. I believe the mandatory minimum sentence is quite substantial." Brielle let out a strangled, breathless squeak. Her knees buckled, and she grabbed the edge of a cocktail table to keep from collapsing. "You're lying!" Preston shouted, completely losing his composure. The veneer of the polished executive shattered, revealing the panicked, petulant man beneath. She's insane. A bitter, jealous ex-wife. Harrison, don't listen to a word she says. I wouldn't advise calling the authorities just yet, Preston, I replied smoothly, because if the police arrive, they'll be very interested in this red folder. And I suspect the FBI will have questions about your sister's management of the charitable foundation as well. Cordelia and Genevieve, who had rushed over from the bar, stopped dead in their tracks. You witch, Cordelia spat, though her voice trembled. You fabricated all of this. I finally smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't warm or kind or forgiving. It was the smile of someone who had waited 2 years for this moment. Mr. Caldwell, I said, turning back to the chairman, Aegis Holdings now controls the majority of your company's distressed debt. Under the terms of the original loan agreements, default triggers and automatic conversion clause, debt becomes equity. As of 5 o'clock this afternoon, Aegis Holdings owns 64% of the voting shares in Whitmore Holdings. Harrison Caldwell's face turned an apocalyptic shade of purple. He snatched the folder from the table, his eyes scanning the first page of the financial documentation. I suggest you call an emergency board meeting, Mr. Caldwell, before the markets open on Monday. I didn't wait for an answer. I didn't look back at Preston's ruined expression. I didn't acknowledge Brielle's tears or the sister's fury. I turned the sapphire necklace catching the light of the chandeliers one final time and walked out of the ballroom exactly as I had entered. Untouchable. The first blow had already fallen 12 hours before the boardroom meeting. At 3 o'clock Sunday morning, in a conference room at the FBI field office in downtown Portland, Cordelia and Genevieve Whitmore sat across from 2 federal agents. They had arrived separately, each believing she was the only one smart enough to cut a deal. When they saw each other in the hallway, the look they exchanged was pure venom. Sisters, allies, co-conspirators for years. Now they were racing to see who could betray Preston faster. We have evidence of your involvement in the charitable foundation fraud, the lead agent said, sliding a folder across the table. Flight manifests, hotel receipts, credit card statements. You're looking at 8 to 12 years, minimum. Cordelia's lawyer whispered something in her ear. She nodded once. What do you want to know about my brother? In the adjacent room, separated by a thin wall, Genevieve was saying the exact same thing. By 4:30 in the morning, the FBI had enough additional evidence to add 3 more charges to Preston's eventual indictment. Charges that even Vivian hadn't known about. Charges that would ensure he never saw freedom again. Blood, as it turned out, was not thicker than self-preservation. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a freight train crashing through a glass window. At 8 o'clock, the Portland skyline was shrouded in a thick, gray fog that perfectly matched the atmosphere inside the corporate headquarters of Whitmore Holdings. The glass-walled boardroom on the 40th floor was a war zone. Shredded documents, half-empty coffee cups, screaming executives. The financial news networks on the muted televisions mounted to the walls ran breaking news tickers in bright red. Whitmore Holdings plummets 52%. In pre-market trading, SAC announces emergency investigation. Anonymous whistleblower releases evidence of corporate fraud. Preston sat at the head of the massive polished granite table. He looked hollowed out. The arrogance that had always defined him was gone, replaced by something animal and desperate. He hadn't slept. He hadn't changed clothes. He was a man watching his kingdom crumble. He was staring at his phone, frantically trying to reach his offshore bankers, but every call bounced back as disconnected. They froze the accounts, he whispered, his voice cracking with pure panic. The feds froze the Cayman accounts. How did they move that fast? How did they even know? Because the evidence handed to them was irrefutable. You colossal idiot. Harrison Caldwell's roar echoed through the boardroom. The chairman of the board was flanked by the company's senior legal counsel and a team of crisis PR managers who looked ready to quit. You left a paper trail a mile wide. Your wife routed corporate funds through a shell company registered in her own maiden name. Did you think you were invisible? Did you think no one would ever look? It was a temporary situation, Harrison, Preston shouted back, his voice shrill and desperate. I was going to put the money back once the waterfront project paid out. It was just a short-term liquidity solution. Short-term liquidity solution? Harrison slammed his fist on the table. That's your defense? That's what you're going to tell the FBI when they come knocking? What about Cordelia and Genevieve? Richard Pemberton, the CFO, asked, his face slick with sweat. They've been running the charitable foundation for years. The exposure there alone could sink us. Preston's face twisted with confusion and betrayal. My sisters would never turn on me. We're family. Harrison let out a bitter laugh. Your sisters resigned from the foundation board at 3 o'clock this morning, Preston. Their attorneys contacted the FBI 2 hours later. They're cooperating fully with federal investigators in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Preston's mouth fell open. No sound came out. They're throwing you under the bus, the senior legal counsel said dryly, adjusting his glasses. Entirely. They've provided additional evidence about transactions that weren't even in the original complaint. Things we didn't know about. Things that could send you to prison for a very long time. Preston slumped back in his leather chair. The air seemed to leave his lungs completely. My own sisters, he whispered. My own blood. We have exactly 15 minutes before the markets open, Richard Pemberton said, his voice cracking. If we don't issue a statement, if we don't announce some kind of restructuring plan, the stock will hit zero by noon. We'll be in bankruptcy proceedings by end of business. Right on cue, the heavy double doors of the boardroom clicked open. The room fell completely silent as Theodore Ashworth strode in, carrying his signature slim leather briefcase, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal pinstripe suit. Following closely behind him, radiating an aura of absolute command, was me. I was dressed for war in a sharp slate gray blazer, tailored trousers, and pristine black heels. I carried no folders this time. I didn't need them. Ashworth, Preston sneered, a desperate, cornered look in his bloodshot eyes. You traitor. You orchestrated this whole thing. You used my mother's contacts to help my crazy ex-wife ruin me. I am merely executing the final wishes of my late client, Vivian Whitmore, Theodore replied coolly, taking a seat at the far end of the table. Your mother was very specific in her instructions. She spent 8 years preparing for this day. Vivian? Harrison Caldwell's voice was sharp with confusion. What does Vivian have to do with any of this? Aegis Holdings is an outside hedge fund. They swooped in on our debt like vultures. Aegis Holdings is a blind trust established by Vivian Whitmore 8 years ago, I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. Funded entirely by her private liquidated assets. Assets she specifically hid from her children because she knew what they would become. Preston's face went slack with shock. She left the trust to me, I continued, interlacing my fingers on the table, on the condition that I use it to buy your debt, expose your fraud, and execute a hostile takeover of this company. That's impossible, Preston whispered, shaking his head frantically. She gave me everything. She gave me the company. She gave me her legacy. She gave you a sinking ship, Preston, and she gave me the torpedo. I let that sink in. Your mother didn't just disinherit you. She weaponized me to tear you down. She spent 8 years documenting your crimes, your failures, your betrayals, every offshore transfer, every forged invoice, every dollar you stole from your own children. Preston lunged out of his chair. You can't do this. I own the controlling shares. I'm the majority shareholder. Not anymore, Theodore interjected, pulling a document from his briefcase. When the loans defaulted on Friday, a clause in the original mezzanine contracts your mother drafted 15 years ago, triggered an automatic conversion. Debt becomes equity. Aegis Holdings now owns 64% of the voting shares. He slid the document across the table. You're a minority shareholder now, Preston. You have no power, no authority, no control. Preston collapsed back into his chair. He buried his face in his hands. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of the building's ventilation system and the muted chaos of the televisions showing the company's stock price in free fall. Then I stood up. Here are my terms. I placed 3 fingers on the table. First, Preston Whitmore resigns as CEO, effective immediately. No severance, no golden parachute, no retention of equity. He walks away with nothing. Harrison Caldwell nodded without hesitation. Second, Whitmore Holdings will cooperate fully with the SEC, the IRS, and the FBI in their ongoing investigations. All servers, hard drives, and communication records will be turned over voluntarily. We will not obstruct justice. Agreed, Richard Pemberton said immediately, his voice hoarse. Third and final, this company will be restructured under new leadership. All equity held by Aegis Holdings will be transferred into an irrevocable trust for my two sons, Caleb and Sawyer Ashford, to be held until their 25th birthdays. I will serve as acting chairman of the board until that time. Silence. Harrison Caldwell picked up his pen and reached for the document Theodore had placed on the table. Where do I sign? Preston found me in the hallway outside the boardroom. He was shaking, sweating. His eyes were wild with something between rage and desperation. Margot! I stopped walking but didn't turn around. Margot, please, wait. Slowly, I turned to face him. He looked pathetic. The expensive suit was wrinkled and stained. His hair hung in greasy strings across his forehead. His face was blotchy and red. This was the man I had married, the man I had loved, the man I had built a life with, raised children with, planned a future with. This was the man who had destroyed everything and then laughed while he did it. We were married for 13 years, Preston said, his voice cracking. We had 2 children together. Doesn't that mean anything to you? It meant everything to me, I said quietly. It meant so much that when you left, I didn't know how to survive. I didn't know how to breathe. I spent 2 years trying to figure out how to keep going when the person I trusted most in the world had betrayed me in every possible way. Preston flinched. I made mistakes, he said. I know that. But we can work this out. We can find a compromise. You don't have to destroy me. Don't I? I took a step closer to him. You hid $850,000 from our divorce judge. Money that should have gone to our children. You haven't paid a single dollar of child support in 2 years. Not $1. Caleb wore shoes that were too small for 6 months because I couldn't afford new ones. Sawyer cried every night because he missed his daddy, and you never once called. Preston opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. Don't talk to me about our children, Preston. Don't pretend you care about them now, when it's convenient, when you need something from me. You're not their father. You're just the man who abandoned them. I reached into the pocket of my blazer. I pulled out a crisp $50 bill. The same $50 bill that Theodore Ashworth had slid across the conference table 1 week ago. The same $50 bill that had sent the entire room into mocking laughter. I placed it in Preston's hand. This is your inheritance from your mother, Preston. This is everything you deserve. Don't spend it all in one place. I turned and walked toward the elevator. Margot! I didn't stop. Margot! The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. I pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors slid closed, I caught one final glimpse of Preston Whitmore. He was standing in the middle of the hallway, a $50 bill clutched in his trembling hand, finally understanding that he had lost everything. Preston is left with exactly what he gave Margot, a tiny fraction of what he was owed, delivered as a final humiliation. But this raises a question I want to ask you. Is this justice or revenge? Is there a difference? Have you ever had the chance to give someone exactly what they deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And stay with me, because Margot's story isn't over yet. 6 months later, spring had come to the Cascade Mountains. The snow was melting from the peaks, sending cold, clear water rushing down through streams and waterfalls. Wildflowers were beginning to push up through the dark earth. The pine forest had that fresh, clean scent that only comes after a long winter. I stood on the cedar deck of the estate, a ceramic mug of coffee warming my hands, watching my sons play on the lawn below. Caleb was 11 now, tall and thoughtful, with his father's dark hair and my stubborn chin. Sawyer was 8, gap-toothed and joyful, chasing a golden retriever puppy we had adopted 3 months ago. They named him Biscuit. Their laughter echoed off the mountains and came back to me like a gift. For 2 years, I had been afraid I would never hear them laugh like that again. Freely, openly, without the weight of worry that children should never have to carry. But here, in this place that Vivian had built for us, they were finally just children again. Theodore arrived at 10 o'clock, as he did every week, with his slim leather briefcase and his impeccable suits. He had become a permanent fixture in our lives, a trusted advisor, a legal guardian of sorts, and increasingly a grandfather figure to Caleb and Sawyer. "Good morning, Margot," he said, joining me on the deck. "You look well." "I feel well," I admitted, "for the first time in years." Theodore smiled. It was still an unusual expression on his severe face, but it came more easily now. "I have the final updates from the legal proceedings." I nodded. "Tell me." "Preston's sentencing hearing was yesterday. 9 years in federal prison, wire fraud, tax evasion, and securities violations. He'll serve his time at the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan. Minimum security, but still. 9 years. I absorbed this information quietly. 9 years. By the time Preston was released, Caleb would be 20. Sawyer would be 17. They would be men, or nearly. They would have grown up without him. I waited for satisfaction. I waited for triumph. What I felt instead was a strange, hollow sadness. "Brielle?" I asked. 4 years. She cooperated extensively with prosecutors, testified against Preston in exchange for a reduced sentence. She's already been transferred to a minimum security facility in California. And the sisters? Cordelia and Genevieve avoided prison time entirely in exchange for their cooperation. However, they've been ordered to pay $2.8 million in restitution to the charitable foundation they looted. They sold their properties in Portland and have relocated out of state. The local society pages have been brutal. They'll never show their faces in Oregon again. I took a long sip of my coffee. "And the company?" Theodore's face brightened. "Whitmore Holdings has recovered remarkably well under your leadership. Stock price is up 34% since the restructuring. The commercial real estate portfolio has been stabilized. We've paid off the distressed debt and are actually showing positive quarterly earnings for the first time in 3 years. The trust for the boys? Fully funded and growing. By the time Caleb turns 25, his share will be worth approximately $12 million. Sawyer's will be similar, plus whatever additional growth occurs in the intervening years." I set my coffee mug down on the deck railing and looked out at the mountains. My sons would never have to worry about money. They would never have to skip meals or wear shoes that didn't fit. They would have opportunities I had never dreamed of. Vivian had given me that. For all her flaws, for all the pain her silence had caused, she had given my children a future. "There's one more thing," Theodore said. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "This was in Vivian's instructions. She wanted you to have it 6 months after the takeover was complete, after you had time to process everything." I took the package. It was light. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small velvet box. The letter was in Vivian's handwriting, but softer somehow, more personal. "Margot, if Theodore has given you this letter, then you have succeeded. You have taken back what was stolen from you. You have secured your children's future. You have done what I could not. I know you must hate me. I know you must think I used you, manipulated you, treated you like a pawn in a game you never asked to play. And you would be right. But I hope in time you might also understand. I spent 52 years building Whitmore Holdings. I poured my entire life into that company. When I realized what my son had become, what he was doing to you and to my grandchildren, I wanted to burn it all down. I wanted to expose him publicly, destroy him utterly, make him pay for every lie he told. But I was old, Margot, and I was sick, and I knew that if I moved too quickly, Preston would find a way to escape. He always had before. He was cunning in his cruelty. So I waited. I watched. I gathered evidence. And I looked for someone strong enough to finish what I could not. I found you. I am sorry for the years you suffered. I am sorry for the cold apartments and the skipped meals and the tears you cried alone. I am sorry that I could not tell you what I was planning, that I had to let you believe I had abandoned you along with everyone else. But I never stopped watching over you, Margot. I never stopped loving you. You were the daughter-in-law I always wanted. You were the mother my grandchildren deserved. The necklace in this box belonged to my grandmother. She gave it to me on my wedding day, and I gave it to you on the night of the gala. But there is another piece that goes with it, a matching bracelet that has been in my family for 4 generations. I want you to have it. Not as a payment or a reward, but as a symbol. You are a Whitmore now, Margot. not by blood, but by something more important, by strength, by perseverance, by love. Welcome to the family, Vivian. I opened the velvet box. Inside was a delicate bracelet of sapphires and diamonds, matching the necklace I had worn to the gala. It was exquisite. It was probably worth more than I had earned in my entire pre-takeover life. But that wasn't what made my eyes sting with unexpected tears. It was the inscription on the inside of the clasp, so small I almost missed it. For Margot, with love I should have shown you when I was alive. That evening, after Theodore had gone, and the sun was setting behind the mountains in a blaze of orange and pink, Caleb came and found me in Vivian's old study. "Mom, can I ask you something?" I looked up from the stack of quarterly reports I was reviewing. "Of course, sweetheart. Anything." He sat down in the leather chair across from the desk, looking more serious than any 11-year-old should have to look. "Was Grandmother Vivian a good person?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I set down my pen and thought carefully about how to answer. "Grandmother Vivian was complicated," I said finally. "She made mistakes. Big ones. She stayed silent when she should have spoken up. She let people she loved suffer because she was afraid of what would happen if she acted." Caleb nodded slowly, processing. "But in the end, she tried to make things right. She spent years planning and preparing, trying to find a way to protect you and Sawyer. She loved you both very much, even if she never got to show it the way she wanted to." "Do you forgive her?" Caleb asked. "For not helping us sooner?" I was quiet for a long moment. "I think I'm learning to," I said. "Forgiveness isn't like a light switch. You can't just decide to do it and have it happen instantly. It takes time. It takes understanding. Sometimes it takes years. But you're trying." "Yes, I'm trying." Caleb seemed satisfied with this answer. He stood up and walked to the door, then paused. "Mom, I'm glad we live here now. I'm glad you're the one running everything." "Me too, sweetheart." "And I'm glad Grandmother Vivian gave you that $50. I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed about that $50 bill. "You know what, Caleb? So am I." After Caleb left, I walked to the window of the study and looked out at the mountains. The sun had set completely now, and the stars were beginning to emerge. Out here, far from the city lights, you could see them in a way you never could in Portland. Thousands of them, millions. An infinite expanse of light and possibility. I thought about everything that had led me to this moment. The cold apartments, the humiliating courtrooms, the endless nights of worry and fear. The moment when a crisp $50 bill landed in front of me and an entire room laughed at my pain. I thought about Vivian, dying alone with her secrets, trusting that I would be strong enough to finish what she started. I thought about my sons, finally free from the shadow of their father's cruelty, finally able to be children again. I thought about the woman I had been 6 months ago and the woman I had become. The $50 bill was framed now, hanging on the wall of this study next to a photograph of Vivian. It was a reminder, not of humiliation, but of transformation, of the moment when everything changed. Sometimes the greatest insult becomes the greatest gift. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are not the ones we expect. And sometimes, if we are very lucky, we find the strength to become something we never imagined we could be. My name is Margot Ashford. I am 38 years old. I am the chairman of Whitmore Holdings, mother of 2 wonderful boys, and the owner of an $18 million estate hidden in the Cascade Mountains. And I owe it all to a $50 bill and the complicated, flawed, ultimately loving woman who gave it to me. Thank you for staying with Margot through her entire journey, from a freezing apartment to the chairman's seat, from victim to victor, from broken to unbreakable. If this story touched your heart, I would be so grateful if you would subscribe to this channel. We share stories about second chances, about hope, about finding family in unexpected places. And I want to hear from you. Who was the Vivian in your life? Who loved you in ways you didn't understand until later? Who gave you the tools to save yourself, even if the gift didn't feel like a gift at the time? Share your story in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Until next time, remember, sometimes the smallest inheritance leads to the greatest fortune, and sometimes the people who seem to have abandoned us were actually preparing us for something bigger, than we could have ever imagined. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. The end.